Welcome to my channel, Scary Stories Daily. I am excited to share today's great stories. I had always found solace in the quiet aisles of IKEA, the rows of perfectly arranged furniture offering a comforting sense of order. But on that fateful night, the tranquility of the store would turn into a nightmare I could never forget. It had been a long and tiring day, and the prospect of a soft, welcoming bed was too enticing to resist. As I wandered through the store, I spotted a particularly inviting mattress. It beckoned to me like an old friend, promising a peaceful night's sleep. Exhausted and with a sense of déjà vu, I lay down, and the world around me began to blur. When I woke up, the first thing that struck me was the darkness. The store was shrouded in an eerie, oppressive blackness. Panic surged through me as I realized that the lights had been extinguished, and the store was now closed. Everyone had vanished. My heart raced as I sat up, trying to make sense of the situation. It was as though time had stopped, and I was the sole inhabitant of this vast retail labyrinth. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was a simple mistake, a misunderstanding, but doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. I knew I needed to find the exit, to escape this unsettling solitude, and so I began to walk. The once familiar aisles had transformed into a disorienting maze, each passage seeming to lead to another identical corridor. The store had become a relentless puzzle, and I was its unwilling player. As I made my way through the darkness, a flicker of movement caught my eye. In the distance, I saw a shadowy figure, its form barely discernible in the dim light. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and that's when the fear began to creep in. The figure had eyes that glowed with an unnatural, malevolent light. Its entire body seemed to be nothing more than a shapeless void, as though it floated above the ground. The sight of it sent shivers down my spine, and I felt a sudden and inexplicable dread. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the imagination, a product of my fatigue and disorientation. But the figure remained, unyielding and undeniable. It was as though the very shadows had come to life, and reason began to slip away. I quickly changed my path, determined to put some distance between myself and the eerie apparition. Yet, as I ventured deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, I encountered more of these unsettling shadows. They all shared the same unnerving characteristics: a formless body, eyes that gleamed with an otherworldly light, and an aura of silent malevolence. Every time I changed direction, the number of shadows seemed to multiply, closing in on me with each step. Panic clawed at my chest, and I began to hyperventilate. The air grew thick with fear, and I could feel my sanity slipping away. Desperation took hold, and I screamed, a guttural cry that echoed through the empty store. I prayed for someone, anyone, to hear me, to rescue me from this waking nightmare. But my voice was met with only silence, and the shadows remained undeterred. In my terror, I stumbled upon a revelation: there was nowhere else to run. The aisles had become a nightmarish trap, and I was the prey. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the horrifying truth: I was utterly and completely alone, surrounded by these sinister apparitions. As I attempted to flee once more, one of the shadows lunged forward, its ethereal form passing through me with a chilling coldness. I recoiled in horror, my skin tingling where it had made contact. The shadow's elongated fingers had grazed my arm, leaving behind a deep, crimson scratch. It was a physical reminder of the horrors that surrounded me, and I clutched my wounded limb as I trembled with fear. With each passing moment, my terror grew, and I felt as though I was teetering on the edge of madness. The shadows showed no signs of relenting, and I could see no way out of this nightmare. I ran, not knowing where I was headed, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. But with each step, The shadows closed in, their glowing eyes fixed upon me. It was as if they were hurting me, driving me deeper into their nightmarish realm. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, everything went black. I felt a searing pain in my head, and my vision blurred. I gasped for breath, but it felt as though the very air had been sucked from my lungs. I fell to the ground, my consciousness slipping away. The last thing I remembered was the feeling of wetness seeping into my clothing. I had lost control, and in my terror, I had urinated myself. And then, darkness claimed me. When I awoke, I was still lying in the same IKEA bed, the soft mattress beneath me soaked with my own urine. My heart raced, and my mind struggled to make sense of what had just transpired. Had it all been a dream, a nightmarish fantasy born from the depths of my exhaustion? I examined my arm, and my blood ran cold. There, etched into my flesh, was the unmistakable mark of a scratch, the same scratch that had been inflicted by the shadowy figure. It was a cruel reminder that the horrors I had experienced were all too real. The confusion and fear that had plagued me in the IKEA store now followed me into the waking world. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed something beyond the realm of the ordinary, something that defied explanation. I couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that the scratch on my arm was a physical testament to the horrors I had endured. It was a scar that served as a chilling reminder of a reality that should not exist. I knew I had to find answers, to uncover the truth behind my nightmarish ordeal. My research led me down a dark and unsettling path, one that revealed a disturbing history of the IKEA store I had visited. It turned out that the store had been built on the site of an old cemetery, a cemetery that had been relocated under mysterious circumstances. The construction of the IKEA store had been mired in controversy, with rumors of unmarked graves and restless spirits. I couldn't help but wonder if the shadows I had encountered were the tormented souls of those who had been laid to rest beneath the store. Had their restless spirits been awakened by the construction, seeking retribution for the desecration of their final resting place? I knew one thing for certain: I could never return to that specific IKEA store. The horrors I had witnessed, whether they had been a product of my own mind or a manifestation of something more sinister, were a darkness that I could never forget. To this day, I remain haunted by the question of whether it was all a dream or a chilling glimpse into a reality that defies explanation. The scratch on my arm serves as a constant reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some terrors are best left undisturbed. I found myself trapped in the labyrinthine corridors of an IKEA store. The clock on my phone displayed a time far later than I had anticipated, and my only goal was to find the exit. Little did I know that this innocuous quest would lead me down a terrifying path, one filled with horrors that would defy all reason. The store was about to close, and I had lost track of time while browsing for a new couch. IKEA's layout was notorious for its confusion, and this particular branch seemed like a sprawling maze with its endless aisles and identical-looking rooms. I followed a dimly lit corridor, convinced it would lead me to the exit. It felt like I had been walking for hours, and the eerie silence was only broken by the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I turned a corner and found a door ahead, a glimmer of hope. Perhaps that was my way out. As I approached the door, a chill ran down my spine. This section of the store seemed unfamiliar, and I couldn't recall seeing it earlier. It was as if I had entered an entirely different dimension within IKEA's sprawling confines. My heart raced, and a sense of unease washed over me. "Hello?" I called out hesitantly, hoping to find a store employee who could guide me to the exit. But there was no response, just an eerie silence that hung in the air. I decided to take a step closer to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. It swung open with an unsettling creak, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. I hesitated, my gut telling me that something was terribly wrong. However, my desire to escape this place overpowered my fear. I stepped inside cautiously, and the door closed behind me with an ominous thud. Panic began to rise within me as I scanned the room, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. It was a bizarre chamber filled with IKEA furniture, but nothing like the usual showroom displays. These pieces seemed different, almost otherworldly. As I continued to explore, I noticed a figure in the corner of the room. It appeared to be a store employee, wearing the distinctive blue and yellow uniform. Relieved to have found someone who could help me, I approached the employee. "Hey, do you know which way is the exit?" I asked, my voice trembling with anxiety. But the employee remained eerily still, as if they hadn't heard me. Maybe he didn't hear me, I thought, growing increasingly frustrated. "Hey, did you hear me?" I raised my voice, but the employee still didn't react. Their silence was unnerving. I decided to get a closer look, to tap them on the shoulder and ask for directions. As I reached out my hand, a terrible realization washed over me. The employee's face was featureless, a blank, pale canvas devoid of eyes, nose, or mouth. Horror gripped my heart as I stumbled back in shock. "The hell is this?" I muttered under my breath, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I had heard stories of bizarre occurrences in IKEA stores, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. Before I could process the situation further, I noticed movement in the shadows behind the faceless employee. Another figure emerged, and this one was different. It was a tall, slender being with elongated limbs, a grotesque silhouette against the dimly lit room. My instincts screamed at me to flee, to escape this nightmarish place, and I turned to make a hasty exit. But as I reached for the door, my heart sank. The exit had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a blank wall. Panic welled up inside me as I frantically searched for an escape route. The faceless employee remained still, and the slender figure was now just standing there, watching me with an eerie stillness. I forced myself to stay calm, reasoning that I might have simply taken a wrong turn. Perhaps the exit was just around the corner. With trembling legs, I decided to walk past the grotesque figure, my eyes fixed on the dimly lit hallway ahead. As I passed the tall entity, it made no move to harm me. It was as if it had no interest in me at all. I quickened my pace, determined to find my way out of this surreal nightmare. But then, a voice echoed through the corridor, a haunting, mechanical voice that sent shivers down my spine. "The store is now closed. Please exit the building." I froze in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice seemed to come from everywhere, surrounding me as if the very walls themselves were speaking. Dread washed over me as I realized that this voice was not a recording, it was the slender figure that had spoken. I tried to continue walking, to escape the ominous presence that loomed behind me, but the figure began to move, its long limbs reaching out towards me. Panic set in as I broke into a sprint, my footsteps echoing through the deserted corridors. "The store is now closed. Please exit the building," the mechanical voice repeated, its tone growing more insistent. I darted around corners, desperately searching for an escape, but every door I tried seemed to lead to nowhere. The store had become a nightmarish labyrinth, trapping me in its twisted reality. My breath grew ragged, and my limbs ached as I continued to run, but the relentless pursuit of the slender figure showed no signs of waning. It was as if I had entered a realm where the laws of reality had ceased to exist. Finally, in a moment of desperation, I found a door that opened into a pitch-black room. I stumbled inside, hoping to evade my pursuer. As the door closed behind me, I realized that I was not alone. The room was filled with an unsettling presence, a chorus of whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that spoke in an incomprehensible language. I felt as though the room itself was closing in on me, suffocating me with its malevolent presence. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the center of the room, revealing a grotesque tableau. The walls were adorned with twisted, nightmarish paintings, and in the center of the room stood a monstrous statue, its features contorted in agony. I stumbled back in horror, my mind unable to comprehend the surreal sights before me. It was as if I had entered a realm of pure nightmare, a place where the boundaries of reality had been torn asunder. In my frantic attempt to escape, I collided with a table, sending it crashing to the ground. The room seemed to react to my presence, the whispers growing louder and more frenzied. I had unwittingly disturbed something within this accursed place. With a surge of terror, I fled from the room, my footsteps echoing through the corridor as I raced to put distance between myself and that nightmarish chamber. The mechanical voice still echoed through the store, a relentless reminder that there was no escape. I ran through the twisted maze of IKEA, my hope dwindling with each passing moment. It was as if the very store itself had become my prison, an inescapable nightmare that taunted me at every turn. Hours passed, and I grew weary, my energy waning. I had seen no sign of the faceless employee or the slender figure, but their presence still haunted my every step. The store had become a malevolent entity, a living, breathing nightmare that sought to consume me. As I rounded a corner, my heart leaped in my chest. There, in the dim light, I saw a figure. It was a man, clad in tattered clothing, his face etched with exhaustion and fear. "Hey!" I called out, my voice weak. "Do you know how to get out of here?" The man turned to me, his eyes wide with terror. "Hurry, the corpse will attract more of them," he whispered urgently. He sounded like someone who knew his way around this nightmarish place, so I followed him as we made our way through the warehouse-like section of the store. I couldn't help but notice that there were more of those faceless entities, but they all seemed to be heading toward the one the man had just killed, as if drawn by some unseen force. We continued through the store, and finally, we arrived at a massive chamber. Piles upon piles of IKEA furniture were stacked haphazardly, forming a makeshift wall that seemed to stretch to the heavens. We walked further into the chamber, and the man, our unexpected leader, turned to face the crowd of survivors who had gathered. "Nobody's called me that in a long time," he said with a weary smile. "If you're new here, Justin is my sister Tabitha's ex-boyfriend." I couldn't help but wonder how a man like him had ended up in charge of this ragtag group of survivors. All things considered, he seemed like a bit of a loser, and I couldn't fathom how he had become their leader. "What is this place?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. "Just like you, all of us found ourselves trapped here one day," Justin replied. "For a long time, we were hunted by the faceless ones, those creatures you've seen. So we banded together to survive. We managed to build this wall, and now things are okay. We've learned to adapt to this new way of life, and nothing can hurt us, as long as we have each other." I was taken aback by his words. It was incredible that they had managed to survive in this nightmare of a store, but it wasn't the life I wanted. I couldn't fathom abandoning my friends and family outside, people who must be worried sick about my disappearance. "So, have you come up with an escape plan yet?" I asked, hoping that there was some way out of this hellish place. "Why would we want to do that?" Justin replied with a cold smile. What, don't you all have friends, families, people who are worried about you? How can you just abandon them? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Justin seemed to revel in his role as a leader, even if it meant keeping his fellow survivors trapped in this nightmarish IKEA. It was clear that he had no intention of leaving, and he would do whatever it took to ensure that no one else did either. Nobody's escaping inside these walls, Justin continued. I make the rules. If anybody wants to leave, they can plant it out there with the faceless ones. I had feared that this might be his response, and I knew that I couldn't give up. I had to find a way to escape this place, to reunite with my loved ones outside. But how could I do it? As I pondered my options, I overheard a whispered conversation among some of the other survivors. They were discussing a journal that Justin kept hidden in his room, a journal that might contain information about this place and any possible escape routes. It was a risky move, but it was the only chance we had. I decided to take matters into my own hands, to expose Justin's deception and free the others from his tyrannical rule. That night, under the cover of darkness, I sneaked into Justin's room. The journal was right where they had said it would be, hidden beneath a pile of old clothes. As I flipped through its pages, I couldn't believe what I was reading. In Justin's own words, he had discovered a way to escape this IKEA nightmare. There were references to exits that appeared randomly at different locations during the night. He had even had a chance to escape himself but chose not to, reveling in his newfound power and control over the survivors. My heart raced as I realized that there was hope, a way out of this nightmare. But I also knew that exposing Justin's deception wouldn't be easy. He had a tight grip on the survivors, and they believed that he was their savior. The next morning, I gathered those who were willing to take the risk, those who still had hope of reuniting with their loved ones outside. We confronted Justin, presenting the damning evidence from his journal. Your leader has been lying to you, I declared, holding up the journal for all to see. In his own words, he discovered a way to escape this place but chose not to. He's been keeping us trapped here, and now he's using fear to control us. There was a moment of tense silence as the survivors looked from the journal to Justin, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Justin's eyes darted around the room, his face contorted with anger. I was trying to protect you, he protested. Out there, I was a nobody, and here, they worship me. No, I don't want to escape, and I can't let anybody else leave either. The room erupted into chaos as the survivors grappled with the truth of Justin's deception. Some sided with him, loyal to the false sense of security he had provided, while others were filled with anger and betrayal. In the midst of the turmoil, a decision was made. Those who wanted to escape would follow us, while those who chose to remain with Justin could stay behind. It was a heartbreaking moment as friends and family were torn apart by the choices they made. We began our march towards the exit, determined to leave this nightmarish place behind. It seemed that most of the survivors were on our side, fueled by the hope of reuniting with their loved ones outside. But our hope was short-lived. As we approached the exit, a deafening crash echoed through the store. I turned to see the unthinkable. The massive wall of furniture that Justin had constructed had collapsed, and the faceless ones were pouring into the chamber. Chaos erupted as the grotesque creatures descended upon the survivors. Their elongated limbs and featureless faces struck terror into our hearts as they tore through the group, their movements swift and merciless. Run! I screamed, my voice drowned out by the pandemonium. We fled towards the exit, but it was clear that not everyone would make it out alive. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my heart pounding in my chest. The mechanical voice still echoed in my mind, a relentless reminder that there was no escape. As I reached the exit, I stumbled and fell to the ground. A sharp pain shot through my leg as one of the faceless creatures grabbed hold of me. I screamed in agony as it pulled me back, its grip unyielding. But then, a hail of gunfire erupted from outside the store. The SCP soldiers had arrived, armed and ready to confront the faceless ones. They opened fire, and the creatures let out eerie, inhuman shrieks as they were mowed down. I seized the opportunity and crawled toward the exit, my vision blurred with tears of pain and fear. With one final burst of strength, I managed to escape the nightmarish store. Outside, the SCP soldiers continued to engage the faceless ones, their advanced weaponry proving effective against the creatures. I watched in horror as the battle raged on, the once deserted parking lot now a battlefield of nightmares. But I was free. I had escaped the clutches of IKEA's twisted maze, and I was determined to ensure that the truth about that place was exposed. In the days that followed, the SCP Foundation debriefed all of us who had been trapped inside the IKEA store. They wiped our memories of the horrors we had witnessed, creating false stories to explain our sudden disappearance. I couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. Justin had been a man who had finally found a place where he felt wanted, even if it meant holding others captive. His fate remained unknown, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder if he deserved a second chance. As I looked back on my ordeal, I couldn't shake the feeling that IKEA's labyrinthine aisles held secrets far darker than anyone could have imagined. The store had become a nightmarish realm, a place where reality itself had twisted into a grotesque parody. I could only hope that my harrowing experience would serve as a warning to others, a cautionary tale of the horrors that could lurk behind the walls of an innocuous-looking store. IKEA's secrets were buried deep, and I had no doubt that there were more twisted tales waiting to be uncovered in the shadows of its endless aisles. I recently moved into a new apartment in a city I knew well, not too far from my previous place. It was a cozy one-bedroom unit on the second floor of a building, and I was excited to start this new chapter of my life. However, my apartment was mostly empty, lacking essential furniture and decorations. After a few days of settling in, I realized I needed to go furniture shopping. My previous roommates had owned most of the bigger items, like couches and tables, so this was the first time I had to furnish an entire apartment on my own. I spent days browsing various websites for furniture and decor ideas, and that's when IKEA caught my eye. The store was a bit outside the city, about 15 minutes from my apartment, but it seemed like the perfect place to find what I needed. On a Saturday morning, I hopped into my car and made my way to IKEA. I had been there a couple of times before, so I knew what to expect, a massive store filled with a vast array of furniture and decor. Little did I know that this visit would lead me down a path of eerie and inexplicable events. I arrived at IKEA around 10 a.m., and the store was relatively quiet. As I wandered through the aisles, I took my time examining various pieces of furniture and decor. Time seemed to slip away as I considered different options for my apartment. As the day wore on, the store grew increasingly crowded with shoppers. By the time I was ready to leave, it was bustling with activity. I had picked out a good amount of furniture and home goods, and my cart was loaded with boxes and bags. With my car loaded up, I drove back to my apartment, eager to start decorating and making the place feel like home. The evening was spent assembling furniture and arranging decorations. It was a satisfying but exhausting process, and by the time I had finished, it was getting late. As I hung some artwork on my living room wall, the clock approached 10 p.m. Suddenly, there was a knock at my apartment door. The sound was unexpected, and I couldn't fathom who it might be at this hour. I approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole, but to my surprise, I saw no one on the other side. It was strange, but I reasoned that it might be a neighbor I hadn't met yet or someone at the wrong door. I opened the door briefly to check the hallway, but there was no one in sight. Shrugging off the odd occurrence, I returned to my decorating. A short while later, my cell phone rang. It was lying on the couch next to me, and I picked it up to see an incoming call from an unknown number. The late-night call filled me with a sense of unease, and I decided not to answer it. The caller didn't leave a voicemail. Despite the strange phone call, I went to bed, thinking it was a one-time occurrence. But that very night, I was awakened around 3 a.m. by a peculiar sound. It was the sound of someone attempting to turn the doorknob of my apartment. My heart raced, and I froze in bed, listening intently. The door remained locked, and after a few minutes, the sound ceased. I lay in bed, wide awake and filled with trepidation. I considered investigating, but fear held me back. Over the next several days, similar unsettling incidents occurred. Late-night phone calls from an unknown number, unexplained knocks on my door, and the persistent feeling of being watched began to take a toll on my peace of mind. 2 days later, I received another late-night call from the same unknown number. I declined the call and put my phone on silent, but it was clear that someone was trying to reach me. The following evening, as I relaxed in my apartment, there were 2 deliberate knocks on my front door. It was still early, around 8 p.m., but I had grown accustomed to the strange occurrences. I approached the door cautiously, but once again, no one was there. Growing increasingly concerned, I decided to investigate further. I waited in my apartment, watching the peephole intently. About an hour later, I heard the familiar knock on my door. This time, I didn't hesitate. I flung the door open, but once again, there was no one in the hallway. What I did find was a white envelope taped to my door, right over the peephole. I removed it and retreated inside my apartment, feeling a sense of dread creeping over me. The envelope contained a handwritten letter, and as I read it, a chill ran down my spine. The letter was cryptic and unsettling, as though it had been penned by a stalker. The author claimed to have seen me recently, expressed regret for not approaching me, and questioned why I hadn't answered their calls. It was a deeply disturbing message, and I felt an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. As I tried to comprehend the letter's implications, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as though someone was observing my every move. The situation had taken a deeply unsettling turn, and I knew I needed help. The next morning, I took the letter and my phone, which contained the mysterious texts and phone calls, to the police. I recounted the strange events that had transpired over the past few days, and I was assured that they would investigate the matter. Days turned into weeks, but there was no progress in identifying the person behind the disturbing messages and knocks on my door. The incidents had stopped, and life seemed to return to a semblance of normalcy. But my sense of unease lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me from the shadows. The unanswered questions gnawed at me, and I grew increasingly paranoid. Had the stalker lost interest, or were they simply biding their time? I couldn't be sure. And then, just as I thought the nightmare had ended, I received another mysterious text message. This time, the texts contained images and short videos. The pictures were taken inside IKEA, zoomed in on me as I shopped, and I realized with horror that I had been unknowingly photographed. The videos showed me walking through the store, each clip lasting only a few seconds. I was filled with a sickening realization: someone had been stalking me from within IKEA, capturing my every move. Panic welled up inside me as I realized the extent of the intrusion into my life. I immediately took screenshots of the texts and rushed to the police once more. I handed them the evidence, and they assured me they would redouble their efforts to identify the stalker. Days turned into weeks once more, but there was still no breakthrough in the case. The stalking had ceased, but the fear remained. I felt as though I were living on the edge, constantly glancing over my shoulder, and I couldn't escape the eerie sensation of being watched. As I looked back on those harrowing weeks, I couldn't help but wonder if the enigmatic stalker would ever be found. The unanswered questions and lingering fear were a heavy burden to bear, and I couldn't escape the unsettling feeling that someone was still out there, lurking in the shadows. The mystery of the IKEA stalker haunted my thoughts, a chilling reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying horrors are the ones that exist just beyond our understanding, in the enigma of the unknown.